Hello, my dears, and how are you this morning? Afternoon, evening, at whatever time you're catching this particular stream. I hope you're doing well and you're feeling bright. Now, we have a beautiful poem to learn today, a poem written by Thomas Hardy. This particular poem, The Darkling Thrush, is a beautiful piece of poetry. This little poem has so much to convey about what was happening at that particular time, that particular era. It has so much to convey about the manner in which the poet thinks, his darkest thoughts, his deepest concerns. He also has a lot of light, a lot of brightness at the end of a dark tunnel. In other words, he has a lot of hope. This little poem conveys to us that no matter how hard the times are, no matter how difficult the path may look, no matter how grim and dark the sky might seem, but there is always a ray of hope, and the sun will shine bright again. It is talking about triumph of hope and joy and goodness upon whatever might be bleak and dark and grey. So let us start by understanding who the poet was. The poet Thomas Hardy, as is given in the book, was born in 1840 and lived up to 1928. One of the most prolific English novelists and poets of the late 19th century. Prolific? One of the most renowned, learned, and in his own way, thrilling. His novels such as Tess d'Urberville, Mayor of Casterbridge, and Jude the Obscure reflect the social and moral concerns of his age. However, Hardy's lyric poetry is by far his best known and most widely read. His poetry explores a fatalistic outlook against the dark, rugged landscape of his native Dorset. He rejected the Victorian belief of a benevolent God, and much of his poetry reads as a sardonic lament on the bleakness of the human condition. So this much itself tells us a lot about Thomas Hardy. He was born at a time when there were a lot of changes about to begin in the way the world thought. His works such as The Mayor of Casterbridge, Tess d'Urberville, all of them convey deeply about his concerns in the changes that were happening about in the society, the manner in which people reacted to one another, the manner in which little changes drew reaction from people. This was a time when a lot of new things were coming into existence. For example, modernization, something that was not very easily acceptable as the Dark Ages, the medieval ages were coming to a close. Industrialization was rising. Women had started to understand that they have much more to give to the society. But how was the society in general reacting was an entirely different story. People's beliefs in the church, people's beliefs in God, and their take on it was changing. So all these changes got together and in the poet's mind created a completely different kind of potpourri. The Darkling Thrush also conveys the bleakness that the poet felt. He could feel a certain underlying depression in everything, underlying despair. But at the end, hope and joy triumphed. I'll read further. He often combines this with rough-hewn rhythms and colloquial diction. His style of writing was extremely lyrical. There was a lot of rhyming. His poems could be converted easily into song. What are lyrics? Lyrics are words written that can be converted into songs. So his poems were very lyrical. And what was the language that he used? English, of course. But the style involved a lot of colloquial hints also. Colloquial, regional. The regional language was often called colloquial also. He influenced a host of later poets such as Robert Frost, W.H. Auden, Dylan Thomas, and Philip Larkin. The poets that have been mentioned here are poets of extreme renown. Who did these poets look up to? Out of many other poets who they were inspired by, Thomas Hardy had a lot of influence in these well-known poets who came after him, which means he had a strong impact on poets that wrote after him. The Darkling Thrush is a nature poem with the theme of hope. The poet begins with a bleak picture of despair and dejection. See, again, he begins with despair, dejection, depressive thoughts, but then goes into a state of hope, a state of joy. The poem begins with a bleak picture of despair and dejection as the poet describes in lyrical descriptive detail. Pay attention to the words lyrical descriptive detail. And what does lyrical mean? Again, very rhythmic, very rhyming. Descriptive, he goes into great detailing of vivid imagery and detail of a dying old world at the turn of a century. Again, his concerns about an era that is going to pass and a new dawn, a new era that is about to come in and is standing at the doorstep. He finds little cause for hope or joy around him. Now this is in the initial parts of the poem. Suddenly he hears the song of a songbird which spreads warmth and hope into the earlier desolate and dead landscape. What raises his spirits? What gives him a reason not to despair, but to look into the future and rejoice? Okay. He finds little cause for hope or joy around him. Suddenly he hears the song of a songbird, which spreads warmth and hope to the earlier desolate and dead landscape. The poet finds his spirits rising, and with it, the realization that there is still hope and joy in the world. Thomas Hardy ने जब अपनी पोएम्स को लिखा, तो इन पोएम्स को उसने एक ऐसे एरा में लिखा, एक ऐसे ज़माने में लिखा जब बहुत सारे बदलाव शुरू हो रहे थे. डार्क एजेस और मिडिवल एजेस ख़त्म होने को थी, मॉडर्नाइजेशन और मशीन एज आने को था. सोसाइटी में भी बहुत सारे बदलाव आ रहे थे. बहुत सारे लोग चर्चेस को क्वेश्चन करने लगे थे. बहुत सारे लोग ये देखने लगे थे कि पुराने वक्त और पुराने लाइफस्टाइल और पुराने सोच विचार के ऊपर सवाल उठाने लगे थे. लेकिन जो लोग इस एरा को जी रहे थे उनके मन में सवाल तो थे ही, मगर नई चीज़ों को अपनाने का बहुत सारा डर भी था. उनको ये भी डर था कि कहीं ना कहीं अगर ये ज़माने बीत गए तो नए ज़माने क्या लेकर आएंगे, क्या उनमें उनके लिए कुछ होगा, क्या मशीनीकरण उनके लिए कुछ अच्छा ला पाएगी, क्या भगवान में और ऑलमाइटी और व्हाटएवर दे माइट हैव थॉट, इन सब के सोच विचार अगर उन्होंने बदल दिए तो कहीं ऐसा तो नहीं कि उनके ऊपर कोई और मुसीबतें आएंगी, या क्या बदलाव अच्छा ही है, उसको अपना लेना ही ठीक है। ऐसे बहुत सारे सवालों के अंदर ये भी टॉमस हार्डी एक ऐसा पोएट है जो कि घिरा हुआ था। उसकी पोएम्स में हमको बहुत सारी ऐसी चीज़ें मिलेंगी जो कि उसके आसपास के चीज़ों को दर्शाता है। डॉसेट में रहने वाला ये पोएट वहाँ के क्लाइमेट को भी बड़ी सेंसिटिवली लेता है, वहाँ के लैंडस्केप को भी बड़े सेंसिटिवली लेता है कि वहाँ जब तेज़ ठंड होती है तो दुनिया कैसी लगती है, जब स्प्रिंग्स आते हैं तो दुनिया कैसी हो जाती है। इन छोटी छोटी चीज़ों को लेकर भी टॉमस हार्डी के बहुत सारे कंसर्न्स थे। अक्सर उसकी पोएम्स में ये पाया गया है कि वो शुरू तो डिस्पेयर से करता है, वो होपलेसनेस होती है, सैडनेस होती है, लेकिन जैसे जैसे पोएम आगे बढ़ती है वो एक बहुत अच्छे नोट पर उसको ख़त्म करता है। वो ये दर्शाना चाहता है कि कभी भी उम्मीद खो देना एक अच्छी बात नहीं है, उम्मीद के सहारे आगे बढ़ते रहना और फ्यूचर में अच्छाइयों को ढूंढना ही इंसानों के लिए बेहतर है। इस पोएम से भी वो हमको ये सब बताता है। जब पोएम शुरू होती है तो उसको सब कुछ बुझा बुझा लगता है, सब कुछ उसको ऐसा लगता है जैसे कि अब दुनिया ख़त्म होने वाली है, अब इस ज़मीन में से कभी भी कुछ हरा भरा पौधा नहीं फूटेगा, या कभी भी ब्रांचेस के ऊपर नई पत्तियाँ, नए फूल, नए फल नहीं आएंगे, कभी भी दुनिया में बच्चे नहीं आएंगे, चिड़ियों के भी बच्चे नहीं आएंगे, जानवरों के भी बच्चे नहीं होंगे। मगर एक छोटी सी चिड़िया के फुल थ्रोटेड सॉन्ग, प्यारे से गाने के मारे उसके सारे भ्रम टूट जाते हैं और वो ये मान लेने पर मजबूर हो जाता है कि नहीं, अभी आगे बहुत कुछ बाकी है। So with this, let us begin with the poem, The Darkling Thrush. I leant upon a coppice gate when frost was a spectre grey, and winter's dregs made desolate the weakening eye of day. The tangled vine stems scored the sky like strings of broken lyres, and all mankind that haunted nigh had sought their household fires. If you pay attention to the first verse, you will see that as I read, there was a lot of rhyming at the end of each line. The rhyming is such that in case a composer would decide, he could make a beautiful song out of the same. I'll read it again so that you can pay attention to the rhyme. I leant upon a coppice gate when frost was spectre grey, and winter's dregs made desolate the weakening eye of day. The tangled vine stems scored the sky like strings of broken lyres, and all mankind that haunted nigh had sought their household fires. How beautifully he rhymes it. Let us read the second verse. The land's sharp features seem to be the century's corpse outleant. His crypt the cloudy canopy, the wind its death lament. The ancient pulse of German birth was shrunken hard and dry, and every spirit upon earth seemed fervorless as I. At once a voice arose amongst the bleak twigs overhead, in full-hearted ever-songs of joy illimited. An aged thrush, frail, gaunt and small, in blast beruffled plume, had chosen thus to fling his soul upon the growing gloom. So little cause for caroling of such ecstatic sound was written upon the terrestrial things afar or nigh around, that I could think there trembled through his happy good night air some blessed hope whereof he knew, and I was unaware. So that's the little poem, and everywhere you will find a rhyme. And in these very few words, when I start to explain, you will understand that almost everything around him has been covered in his description. So let us begin to understand, line by line, what does the poem have to say.